And welcome everyone to another OSR tabletop with myself, DM Bloodworth or GM Bloodworth, or it depends on whatever I'm happen to be playing or running at the time. And I am joined by Eric here, and I'm going to let Eric introduce himself, and we are going to be talking about Gary Gygax's Dangerous Journeys. So this is a really interesting, coming of events here, because it's Dangerous Journeys is something that I had covered years and years ago, when I first got the books, and I wanted to complete my collection of everything that I could that was Gary Gygax, whether it's considered to be good stuff, bad stuff, whatever. It was like, I just want my full Gary Gygax collection. So I got it's going to slip my mind. Cyborg Commando, which is not generally treated as a great game system, but it's Gary Gygax, and then I picked up Dangerous Journeys and Legendary Adventures and all of his novels, which took me quite a while to get a hold of all of his novels, and then his two novels that he wrote for both game mastery and mastering playing a tabletop role-playing game. So just so much interesting things. And I had spent the time off screen talking to Eric, and which is our first time we're meeting, and so I'll get to that as well. But talking about my first meeting with Gary Gygax, and so I'm not going to take that time now to repeat that on my channel. You've probably heard it half a dozen times at least, but I don't know. I'm guessing Eric reached out to me first, and I'll let Eric lead into that, mentioning Dangerous Journeys, or maybe I did offhand, and then he jumped in and said, "Hey, let's talk." So Eric, please introduce yourself.
Eric Smith is my name, and I'm a historian by trade and profession. I graduated from Ohio University with my BA in history, minor in philosophy, and then I just graduated again last year, December, with my master's in world history and minor in American history. And I'm a musician. I've got like 10 albums out everywhere. And I also play Dangerous Journeys, and I'm a huge fan of Gary Gygax. And so I'm always looking on the internet to see if I can find anything on YouTube, anybody talking about or doing anything with Dangerous Journeys. And your program was one of the few that I ran across that had anything at all about it. And so I said, okay, I've got to talk to this guy at some point in the future. And then that's kind of how I got a hold of you this last time. I'd seen that you were doing a live cast, and I started talking to you about Dangerous Journeys and the lawsuit and the history of it and that sort of thing. And as soon as I graduated, I had wrote a paper about it, and I sent it over to you. And
right.
That's kind of how we
really started. Interesting read. Yeah. So that was something that if you have a blog, you should definitely publish that on a blog, because that would be an interesting read, and just if you have the time to do like a Dangerous Journeys blog, it would certainly be something that I think a lot of people would be attracted to, because once you reached out to me, I was like, well, let me see what else is out there, there's a Facebook community for it. There's a lot out there. And I was really surprised that you consistently run Dangerous Journeys. So let's hear about that, like, going to conventions and running Dangerous Journeys.
Okay, yeah. So when the game first came out, I think it was like 92, 93, I seen it on the shelves, and I thought, hey, this sounds like this is Gary's magnus opus. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, it really sounds like there's a lot of hype behind this. I'm going to go ahead and buy right into it. And so I just immediately got the books, immediately started deciding that this was going to be my future forever game.
Mhm.
And went through all the material and then had people roll up characters and we started playing. And we played from at least 93 solidly till about 4 years ago when I left to go to Florida. And so when Gary Conn the one was going to go on, and we heard about that, one of the things that I very, very much wanted to do was take this unrepresented game,
Mhm.
obscure game that I could see that he obviously put a lot of work and thought into, um, and run it at GaryCon, because I thought, well, it'd be a travesty if not, right? It's got to have all these games represented. So I brought it up there and I ran it on that first time, and then I went back, I think, all the way up to GaryCon 6. I went to all of them and ran unpublished material. Like,
Right.
so is it okay we get into some of the history of it?
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
So originally in the mid to late 80s, when Gary started coming up with different methods of role playing in terms of mechanics, he started working with a guy named Mike McCulley,
Mhm.
and he collaborated exclusively with him and Mike McCulley to create a new game. And then the genre at the time was a horror. It was a horror role playing game, and they called it Unhallowed. And so they had the game like 98% complete, and I have it here. Yeah, this is one of these. Bear with me while I go through all of
Oh, go
this.
right ahead.
Yeah, here it is. So this is the printed out manuscript of the first form of Dangerous Journeys, when it wasn't even called Dangerous Journeys. It
Mhm.
wasn't called Dangerous Dimensions. And before it was called Lord, it was just called Unhallowed. And this is basically Gygax and Macaulay's work. And there are a lot of subtle differences about the mechanics, like the time sequences are different and they
Mhm.
changed them later. But when they presented this to GDW, they were working with JVC as well to get computer games of this game in the market along with
Right.
the RPG book version. And they made a decision, they being GDW and JVC, they really wanted the master of fantasy to have his magnus opus not be a horror role playing game, but a fantasy.
Mhm.
So they had to make a sharp right turn and change all of that into a fantasy setting.
Mhm.
And that meant different levels of magic and stuff, because that had a lot of ritualistic magic mechanics in it,
Right.
because magic was like hard to do and it took a lot of effort on Earth, like the real Earth, because this is
Right.
supposed to be sort of like an X-Files sort of game.
Yes.
And then they had to like boast that up. And so they started writing what they called mythos. And around this time, they got on the idea of making this a system, a multi-genre system,
Right.
because they already had the horror aspect. And so they were working off of that to make the fantasy aspect, which they called
Mhm.
a mythos. And of course, that's what we all ended up with, is mythos.
Mhm.
And certain things were lost in the translation for sure when this happened. There were issues about the difference between Viril and Hika, because in Unhallowed, Viril was what powered the magic, and in Mythos, Hika was what powered the
Mhm.
magic. And so there was like this ratio. And then in Unhallowed, there were psychogenics, but there wasn't psychogenics in Mythos. There was Hika engendered powers. And it was just basically what all he was saying was, when you hop from one to the other, you're just kind of transforming things. But it was a little confusing, and sometimes it was dropped off certain lists in the Mythos core book. So you'll see references, for instance, in the Quarks table to psychogenics,
Mhm.
right? And so there's things like that. And then there's a few other things that were left out, because once they started working with GDW and they announced that they were going to have this game, TSR immediately sued them
Yes.
for copyright infringement. And um, let me bring up the one that I have here. So Here's an example from TSR's second supplemental answer to GDW's first set of interrogatories to the plaintiff. This is in the Central District of Illinois, is where this lawsuit apparently took place.
Mhm.
And they've got these things numbered, and they go from 1 to 368. That's how many complaints TSR lodged in terms of copyright infringement. And so just picking one at random,
Mhm.
number 323, the Veraxis annoying itch charm in Mythos Magic book page 36 is derived from the scratch cantrip, and the AD&D Unearthed Arcana page 49. Go take another random one. 263, the Hika dart function of the Wand of Assault in Mythos Magic, page 343, is derived from the Wand of Magic Missiles in the AD&D First Edition DMG, page 136. So they lodged like almost 400 complaints. And you can see in Mythos Masters magazine where Frank Mincer writes about this, and he says it's basically a game where they were trying to take as many turns in the game as they could, and each turn costs about $1,000. And the whole strategy was to just bog it down until
Right.
either people ran out of money or people got tired of being associated with the weight that this
Yeah.
brought to the situation. So,
Which is
they
why TSR became, they sue regularly, right?
yeah,
And it was completely out of Lorraine Williams' fear that whatever Gary Gygax was going to produce and publish was going to overtake the market, and because at the time D&D was definitely struggling. At the time it was really bogged down with second edition and the bloat and all of the splat books and everything. They had overproduced. Not even talking about the quality of the books, or the game system. I'm just talking about they oversaturated their supply chain with it,
yeah,
so that it just wasn't going to go anywhere. And then third edition, which would come a little bit after this time frame, all right, was still not a great time frame, as far as almost following that same kind of model of just oversaturation with a lot of content, a lot of books, involved with it. But at that point, you had the OSR, right? You had the OGL 1.1.0a, at the time, which most of the third party and other companies were starting to utilize, where TSR finally lost a lawsuit, basically saying game mechanics are you can't license game mechanics, and
yeah.
and that was
Just their
really
artistic expression.
yeah, that was really like the nomenclature, fine, but so a lot of the stuff that they were utilizing against Dangerous Journeys or Mythos, and against Gary, at the time was would not have been an issue anymore because he was just converting game mechanics and renaming it, and they wouldn't have been able to do a darn thing about it at that point. So Dangerous Journeys just came probably about 5 or 6 years too soon.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, man. It would have survived a little better in that other climate,
yeah,
or it would have at least found wherever its audience was. But instead of being killed out like it was, um, surprisingly, while this lawsuit was going on, they released the Zero book, the one book which was the core book,
right.
the Mythos Magic book, Necropolis, the Epic of Earth, and the Earth Animalia, the bestiary,
Yeah,
right? They released all of that. They released the screens.
right.
They released 6 Journeys magazines. Hold on.
Yeah, that's something I don't have. but I'll probably try to get them if I can.
And they released 6 Mythic Masters magazines. Those are only in electronic copy, but I have a copy of one of them that was an author copy that I got. And so these were like the last things that were released in all of these Mythos Masters magazines, and the Journeys magazines have like updates and corrections and things. So they were producing a crazy amount of material while this ship was sinking. In fact, beyond all of that, they produced these 3 books. That these are the reprints of those books from Planet Books,
Right.
but they originally came out in a different one. But the Anubis murders, and that's there, and
Yeah,
Death
the
in
novels. Yeah,
LA.
there was 3
Yeah,
novels, if I'm
yeah.
correct.
Well, actually, they found a 4th one.
Yeah.
Uh, after Gary died on disc that they published called Infernal Sorceress. So there's like a 4th book, and they even released them in hardback.
Right. Right.
And then they have posters like the one that's there on the
Yeah.
back of my wall. So there was a lot of material actually that
Yeah.
they ended up publishing. But eventually, when they were dropped by JVC, they eventually were then dropped by GDW, and then it just all the wheels fell off the wagon and they didn't go any further. And when that happened, I was like right there at the time that I was so into it that I ended up being online with a bunch of the people who were editors for the game, like Greg Tim and John Troy and the co-author Dave Newton.
Hmm.
And because they had all of this material that they were working on that they couldn't publish and wasn't part of the out of court settlement, because eventually there was a 6-figure out of court settlement.
Hmm.
And then surprisingly, TSR asked Random House to ask the bookstores to send the Dangerous Journeys books back.
Hmm.
And they basically shelved the whole inventory. It's like that's the only time I've ever seen them be taking role-playing games off the shelf like it was bad food. Like, no, you
Yeah.
don't even try to sell this. Just bring this back to us. We don't want this out. And they kind of buried it like Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? They just,
Yeah.
this doesn't even exist.
Or like
Um,
the ET Atari game. It's like,
yeah.
yeah.
Just find it in the dump somewhere later on. But there were, at the time, there were things in the works. Like, for instance, there is, you've noted that the bestiary that you have is just animals, right? Like it's just natural animals and
I believe.
things underground and that sort of thing,
Yeah,
right?
it's actually bestiary number 1. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this one here.
Yes, and that just covers animals on the surface of the earth, like
Hmm.
normal animals, and a few animals like a lot of
Yeah,
dinosaurs. And
dinosaurs and
there's
stuff. Yes.
some underground dwelling creatures like slugs and things like that are in
Right.
there. But what's missing is there's no undead, there's no dragons,
Right.
there's none of the traditional fantasy monsters or any of that. All of that is in this manuscript here. This is the
Right.
manuscript that Dave Newton was working on that was ready to go into publishing, that has all of the undead and all of that in it, that they never were able to publish. And so all those guys gave me that stuff that they were working on. Like behind me, I've got Greg Tim's sequel to Necropolis, which was called The Lost Ziggurat.
Hmm.
And so basically there was a whole even more of this game. There was also behind me over here is a full manuscript for another genre module called Changeling, which was a weird science fiction role-playing game. Sort of like a Jules Verne slash maybe Arthur C. Clarke kind of a feel, and with its own backstory and the ability to roll up androids and robots and people that lived on Mars and Venus and Earth. And I have an essay that I did about the androids, the robots, and the artificial intelligences of the world of Changeling.
Hmm.
So it was going to be expansive, and they were going to sell genre modules that had slight rule changes but would fit into the overall universal rule and mechanic system of the game. And it does. I mean, you can pretty seamlessly take a character from Unhallowed to Changeling to Mythos
Right.
with little problem.
Right. So So what is the possibility? I don't know if you've actually thought about this or whatever, but since the OGL and now since everything has gone like Creative Commons and all of that, and various SRDs, SRD 5.2, I believe now, since a lot of the nomenclature has been freed up and a lot, the game mechanics going back to the original OGL have been freed up and everything. What's the possibilities of you taking those manuscripts and publishing them?
Um, I I could do that. I could do that with no problem because the mechanics, as you pointed out earlier, can't be copywritten. So, and the artistic expression of these two genre modules were never part of the lawsuit. So
Right.
Hasbro don't own them. So I could publish them as they were technically, either as historical documents or in some fashion as a game. But the thing about that is right now we have a whole group of people that's pretty much being spearheaded by the co-author of the game, Dave Newton,
Hmm.
and some really diehard fans who understand the material like the back of their hands, that we've all
Right.
talked and collaborated. And so Dave has put a Discord up for us to be able to try to reprint some of this stuff in a more coherent way with these additions that are
Right.
lying all
Right.
around me, right? So, in that sense, I wouldn't want to compete with the momentum that Dave in the Facebook group has going with what we're doing. We're trying to work together as a team, and then if anybody, I mean, it's not we won't be able to publish it for money because these underlying not like a fantasy aspect, right? But we would publish it for fan use. And so Dave has already published one publication. And like one of the things that I contributed was an essay about Hika reservoirs, how they work and how you use them and how you recharge them and all of this. So we're kind of publishing some things. We're just not charging anything for it. As far as making money in some other way, I would just rewrite it as a clone if that was the case.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
put
I wonder
15,000 words toward that, but
who actually owns the licensing of it.
right now Hasbro owns Dangerous Journeys. And
Really? All right.
yes, and they have no intention
Of
on
course not.
having
No.
another Gygax game compete with the one that they're already trying to promote and not doing well at.
Yeah.
So that would just probably undermine their their calls for money. I just realized there's like people writing questions to the right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna throw it in there. So, is there a Dangerous Journeys fake? Yes. You just type in Dangerous Journeys and you'll find it. I joined it shortly afterwards. I'll get the link. I'll throw the link up in there. So I'm on Facebook. So let's just do Dangerous Journeys. And so I have the Dangerous Journeys multi-genre RPG fans.
Yep.
That's the one. That's the main one, I'm guessing.
I think it's probably the only one, but
The only one? All right. So I will link this in there. Let's see. Let me see. Let me get rid of that there.
yeah, that's the right
share.
one.
Yeah, let me do a share and copy the link, and now I can post in here. So I'm going to post the link here, and can't post message to channels. Why? Can't post message to. Does everybody see that that just posted? It should have been.
I see it.
All right. So I don't know why it's telling me you can't post messages to channel, but so it's there. So you can all jump in there, and I will also put this in. Nope, that is the chat. Yeah, so it's there. So you can link there. It is the only one. I see that there's some people like Jeffrey Talanian is a member. John Scott is I see these are going to list most of the people that I am friends with already. But a lot of these people are gaming people.
Yeah.
So almost all of my Facebook friends, the over 3,000 of them are game related. Well, because this is my gaming account, on Facebook. This is not my this is not my personal account, which is a different name and everything. So yes, Bloodworth is not my real name. All right. So my real name is Richard, but on Facebook it's Edward James Bloodworth, which is not me. It's been me since 1996. But but anyway, so yeah, so you're still not getting the notifications, and I posted this originally like 2-3 days ago. So that's very weird. That you're not getting notifications, Agile. But so let me ask you about your experiences actually running it at Gary Con. So how has the game been received from like players? Are they almost exclusively like old players who knew it from back in the day, or you're getting young new crowds checking it out for the first time and whatnot?
Yeah, it's a mixture. It's a mixture. Most people are signing up for it because they don't know what it is.
Okay.
And they couldn't get into some other game that got filled up really quickly, right? So a lot of people were just coming over because they know it's a Gygax game, but they've never heard of it. So let's check it out, kind of a thing. And then the other balance were people who knew what it was. Like I did a volunteer staff game for Luke Gygax and the people that ran Gary Con, because they all knew what it was, and Luke wanted to play his dad's game,
Yeah.
and I gave 2 demonstrations where I just talked about the materials and how they work and stuff.
Mhm.
And so he set in on those 2. And Frank Mincer came in when I was running the staff volunteer game just to watch a game being ran, because I don't know how much he had seen that either. And he sat down beside me until he accidentally cut his finger and he left. And so, it's been a mixture of people that want to check it out and stuff. And most of the people find it to be a pretty intuitive and easy to learn game. It's a percentile based game at its
Right.
heart. And essentially, like, to roll a hit, you're rolling 2 different percentile dice. And one tells you if you hit or not, and the other one tells you a strike location. And the
Right.
strike locations are very elegantly divided into non-vital, vital, super vital, and ultra vital, which is basically a weapon damage times 2, 3, 4 situation, right?
Wow. All right. That's cool.
So yeah, I mean, it really takes out things like strike location and such things like that, and
Mhm.
all the armor is divided up for strike locations. So you can literally have individual pieces of armor. You can have your van brace and jam brace and your gorget and all of this stuff, and it has different vital areas that it protects. Like the gorget protects your throat, so that's only ultra vital and doesn't protect other
Correct.
areas, for instance.
Yes.
Um, and the initiative can be a little complicated if you're going to use the initiative system called the 30 beat second that was introduced in the Mythic Masters magazine. That's individual initiative. But so far, my players and the people I've talked to love it. They love the idea that there's individual initiative and it's not okay, this side goes, or it's an alternation because you've got 3 attacks every
Right.
2 rounds and you've got 2. So you start and end. They don't like that category system. They like the
Right.
idea that there's a specific number, and when that number pops up, it's their turn,
Your
and
turn.
then
Yeah.
then they can calculate down to the next number. So that's a little complicated, but so far everyone's said no. We will take the complication, and it slows down the game a little bit in combat, but it makes it much more visceral.
Mhm.
Because things happen in the moment, and you can change things. So the combat is pretty smooth for the most part. When you take damage, you take so much damage in a vital or non-vital area or whatever, and you subtract it from that part of the armor. And if it goes over your armor, you take damage to your physical trait. The whole trait system can be complicated, but in play, it's really nice to have. So you have like mental, physical, and spiritual
Mhm.
traits, but each of those are divided into 2 categories. Like the mental traits divided into the mnemonic and mental reasoning categories, and the physical is divided into neural physical and muscular physical, right? And then each of those are divided into 3 attributes. But the point to that is if you're on the fly and you're looking for a trait to base a roll off of, you can kind of select the level very broadly for whatever the challenge is that you have in mind. If it's not
Right.
like wrote down in your notes or something. And it's a skill based system too. So that allows you to default to these attributes or these categories or these traits when you don't actually have the skill or the sub area. So no matter what you're trying to do, it's all connected within those areas. And then each skill, the knowledge skill area, is super robust. Like the description of these skills, the knowledge skills areas are super robust and allow you to do a number of things. And every time you make a roll, you have a difficulty rating, and or you could call it a circumstance modifier,
Right,
but it's
right,
called a difficulty rating. And so you have a difficulty rating that you apply to your steep points, which is anachronism, study, experience, exercise, training, and practice, right? And so if you have a 50 steep in something and the difficulty rating is hard, it's a straight up 50% chance or under.
right,
If you have a moderate result, you can multiply it by 1.5, and then you got like 75% or under. And it goes the other way. If it's more difficult, you
right,
might have the score, right? So
right.
everything is very fluid, and on the fly, the DM can kind of pick one of these DR ratings and apply it to a skill to make the
Right.
challenge wherever it needs to be,
Yeah.
if it's not written in your notes.
Right. That's it's something I'm going to say something that some people might be like is controversial, but game designers in the late mid to late 80s, early 90s weren't afraid of math. I'm saying it was like you know I mean today it's called crunchy or even sometimes too crunchy or whatever, and um, I used to love the math, and I wasn't a big math person, in my youth either. And it was just I never had a problem with whether it was THACO, which is kind of a joke, really, that anybody would have a hard time figuring out THACO, but yeah, there was a lot more math involved, and that first and second generation of game players, you know, yeah, there was a reason why we were part of nerd culture or whatever, because you know, we were the kids that were reading a lot, and we were, good in our classes, or mathematics or whatever. The rise of computer technology in our junior highs and our high schools back in the 80s too, and it really did coincide with the ability to do what might be considered advanced math today, but to us it was just like kind of you know doing carrying capacity for villains and vigilantes was a freaking treat. You know what I'm saying? Now you can go to that other extreme, like Rollmaster was freaking, like I was like, character creation was like, no, too damn crunchy, too damn tedious. But a lot of people, I think they look at that time frame and they say, "Oh, the math was so hard." It wasn't hard for us, and we were teenagers at the time. So it's like, maybe you're not advanced enough, in today's, at
I think
today's.
it's just the desire to figure it out, and not
Yeah,
having access to calculators all the time, or to
yeah,
computers, or to AIs or anything to answer simple, quick questions. So you kind of had to figure it out, and did it wrong a lot of times and stuff too. Yeah, and a lot of this is talking about somebody wrote here, dangerous journeys and legendary adventures were unique unto themselves. That's true.
yeah.
Legendary adventures was vaguely derived from dangerous journeys. It was like a more simplified approach to some of the
Mhm.
concepts. And it wasn't a bad system or anything, but I never really got into it. I just stuck with dangerous journeys.
Right.
And but but yeah, definitely unique the way that system plays too. Yeah.
So let's talk about conventions. So you said that you've gone to Gary Con, and you're moving back to Ohio, or you're back in Ohio now, right? So so you have things like Gamehole is in Ohio, and Origins, I believe, is in
Yep.
Ohio as well. And so that you know, are you you shouldn't be that far from that Western New York area as well, correct?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to make you aware, if you're not aware already, of the Central New York Gaming Convention that is in 3 weeks. All right, so I will definitely encourage you, if you can, Now this one is in it's in New Hartford. It's near Utica, New York.
Okay.
So it's probably within a couple hours, of you and everything. But I definitely recommend that you check that out
Okay.
if you can. And you can find it on my channel. Just go through my things. I'm actually going to do a video, promoting this one last time before the convention, because literally in 3 weeks as of yesterday, it's going to start. So, and I will be there, and a whole bunch of others will be there as well. So if you can
Cool.
get yourself out to that, I don't know what your schedule is like, but if not this year, certainly, consider hitting that New York, because like I said, it's probably, Utica is not that far from the Ohio border. And I
Yeah.
understand Ohio is a big state too, but um, that's as close to Ohio in New York as you're going to probably get,
Yeah. Yeah.
for a gaming convention. So Ohio, yes. Are you in Ohio as well, Squirrel? We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So GURPS vehicle has a beast of a book. Yeah, GURPS vehicles. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed GURPS back in the day too, and GURPS was, although I did mostly the Conan solo, GURPS and everything. Absolutely love that. I mean, that was so much fun to play that, and you could play it with a group too if you wanted to, but I have all of those, and I absolutely loved it, and you know, I was never really a huge fan of skill-based systems within the fantasy genre, you know. And I'm like looking at Dangerous Journeys, I really consider it to be more of like a historical fantasy, kind of setting, so a little bit lower on the magic side and everything, but that's probably because I don't have the bestiary that's the more stranger creatures. I just have the animals and everything, which I could run it with just that, and probably enjoy it, doing that, kind of like running Hyboria, the Hyborian Age and any
Yeah.
of the Conan settings as well.
And
But
Dave Newton, who's still active and is doing a lot of this, he's the person that pretty much made the Mythos magic system. He
yeah,
was handed a whole bunch of names of
mm,
castings, and then he was asked to fill out the details. So, and he was the guy who was basically converting from Unhallowed into Mythos. So, you know, he's still around if there's a if you want to say, hey man, what were you thinking when you wrote this?
yeah,
What are you talking about?
yeah, yeah. He should. Yeah, I mean, because I was just having a conversation with Stephen Chenault of Troll Lord Games, and they do have the ability, the license to start reprinting Gary's adventure modules. So Gord, and they are going to create tabletop role playing supplements for Gord as well, probably in their Castles and Crusades vein, like they're doing Gary Gygax's Iggsburg campaign setting.
Yes.
And so that's another place where, it would be nice. I mean, I would love for Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro to give up on all of the TSR IPs that they have no intention of doing anything with, and just sell them off, sell them to whatever third parties are willing to buy them, whether it be the Gygax family buying some of them, or any of these other entities that are willing to bring them on and be able to start publishing this stuff again, and even updating and whatnot, keeping basically the core, but basically, like you said earlier, making like retro clones of these things, and just have the freedom to do it without the fear of getting sued,
Yeah.
for putting out something that they have no intention of doing. And it's just shame
Yeah.
that a corporation such as that still holds an IP that they don't genuinely respect.
I believe they have Def Jam Records too, don't they? Hasbro, don't they own Def Jam Records?
Yeah, that I'm not sure about. I'm
Yeah, I think they do.
I'm less of a musician
I'm just saying,
music,
speaking of things that they're not really going to do anything with,
yeah.
they
So,
own stuff that they don't need. So
yeah, well, yeah, that's for certain.
are you familiar with these sets of books?
Yes,
That the Cantonese,
they're being reprinted.
right? You had brought that up.
Yes,
Living Fantasy,
yes. Yep, I backed.
Gambros.
Yep, I backed that Kickstarter. I backed. I believe I'm getting seven of the books, seven of the hardcovers out of 8.
Okay, so
And then I have the 2. Yeah, I already have those 2 that came in soft cover. So I have the
that one.
let's see where I popped them.
I-
I think I
I-
popped them in here. So I have the
the
Cant.
Cantoning Crew.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I have the Cant, and then the other is I have someplace. Ooh, I just lost my pencil. The other is someplace.
These
but I already got 2 of these, and the other, I don't know what I did with it. It's not in my white box, but it's someplace. Oh, maybe it is here. No. No. Oh, here it is. Lodash's Librum. Lodash's Librum.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's the other one that came in that. But yeah, I'm waiting about 7 hardcovers coming
So
from them.
these whole sets of books, they
Mhm.
were originally intended for Dangerous Journeys.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
So,
and some of them, like the Hermit, I actually have the Hermit is written for actually for Legendary Adventures. I think of the Hermit, but I have the Hermit for Castles and Crusades.
Richard Balsley, that did the Cosmos Builder for that set of books, he gave me the manuscript that he did for Castle Builder that was intended for Dangerous Journeys.
Right.
And then he later changed it into a generic setting and published, like self-published it. But
Right.
also here are all the manuscripts for and their outlines for the Pantheon books that they were going to do.
Mhm.
They were going to do a set of Pantheon books like the ones that Troll Lords did with the Builder books, the World
Right.
Builder books, and of course that got abandoned too.
Yeah.
But all of the people who had written in to do the project, though, all of that material couldn't go anywhere. And there was also a project called Ansalon that they were going to publish, which was going to be kind of like a box set, kind of like a campaign setting for
Right.
Dangerous
Right.
Journeys. It went unpublished for decades, and eventually Don Eccles bought the material and ended up publishing it. So this book was published, like, I think a year ago, and is technically the last sort of Dangerous Journeys book that was printed. Like,
Right.
all of the material that he did is in there, but it's just not done up in Dangerous Journey stats,
Right.
except for what Don Eckel gave me that I printed out and put in it, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that Gary Gygax had done that is going to start to reemerge, and and that's really exciting just on its own, and then there's from what I've been told in several interviews now, is that there's stuff out there that was never published that is in the Gary Gygax estate that is starting to be released because his wife is starting to realize that, hey, there's money to be made here, and the estate holders, which are a third party, holds the estate. The executors of the estate are saying, basically, yes, you can print this. Let's see how well it goes before we let you print the next thing. And so that's why Troll Lord Games is starting to pick up more and more of this, because they've been so far pretty successful, on some of these things. I'm waiting to see and hopeful that they can touch bases with James, James Ward's estate or his family or whatnot, and try to get Metamorphosis Alpha reprinted, because they had they did have the hardcover for their space thing. Ah, crap. I just lose. I have so many different game systems in my head. It was the Warden. All right, so
Okay. Okay.
Spaceship Warden. Yeah. So they did have the license for producing that, but since they were going to potentially get to reprint it, and then James Ward passed away, about 2023, 2024. Actually, I think it was last year, 2024, and and that's kind of in limbo right
Yeah.
now as to where that can go. So it's just so unfortunate that TSR, and this is partly Gary's fault too, was like he didn't let anybody hold on to anything that was their creation, including himself. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, very famously, he couldn't use Dungeon Master in his, a Dungeon Mastery book novel. He had to change it to Game Mastery because he was going to get sued for using Dungeon Master, and it was a term that he created himself. So it's almost like losing the license to use your own name kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it's unfortunate that he didn't have the foresight to see how he was going to get backstabbed and have everything stolen out from behind him. Again, not that he was the greatest manager of properties and whatnot, but yeah, too bad. A lot of those things weren't separated long before, long before they were,
Yeah, because like his Gord novels, the first two were wrote under TSR's
yeah,
banner, right? And then when he rewrote those, he had to change certain names of the countries because he couldn't use the
right,
Greyhawk names, right?
yeah,
And at the end of Dance of Demons, he has Gord and the other person who's with him escape to Dangerous Journeys, Epic of Earth.
yeah,
Like it talks about them going to another world and references Dangerous Journeys Earth because that's where his mind was at the time.
yeah,
He was, and also Hugh, as in the what was it, demigod or a quasi deity of
yeah, yeah.
Greyhawk, Heward,
Oh
where
yeah,
Heward's mystical organ comes from,
yes, yeah,
and the material component for the plane ship spell being a tuning fork, like
hmm,
all of that in the Heward's handy haversack, all of that came from his uncle Hugh, who used
yeah,
to tune organs
yeah,
and carried around this bag of tuning forks. And
mm,
so Hugh, being a quasi deity in Greyhawk, also escaped into the Dangerous Journeys. So there was like three characters that he brought and imported there, like really sly,
yeah,
without those names being copywritten by anyone else. So I
right,
always thought that was really cool. And in one of the Mythos Masters magazines, in one of Gary's editorials, he talks about all of this and talks about the influence of his uncle Hugh and this sort of thing. So it's really interesting. If you can get a hold of the electronic copies of Mythic Masters magazine, the Gary's editorials are worth almost as much as the game material that's in it.
yeah,
Him talking and about things, and he's a lot more freer with his thoughts in this vehicle
hmm,
than he has been in other vehicles and stuff. So there was a lot of insight. So, and you can get a hold of these. You can get them.
yeah,
Probably by the Facebook group and stuff like that. So
yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely look into those. I mean, I was looking around and everything. I was looking on eBay to see if I can actually get the magazines, which I probably could find them there as well. Um, but yeah, that's certainly something that I will look into doing and just try to get the collection. Like I said, like the Troll Lord, the biggest thing that Troll Lord Games told me about his Gord novels is that they're going to do them in audiobook.
oh, that's cool.
Yes, I was like, absolutely. As someone who still commutes, about 2 hours and 20 minutes, a day for the 3 days a week that I work, it's like I would just love to have those, because I do have the novels, but my eyesight isn't what it used to be, and those are old school novels, and they're written with that typeset that is freaking tiny compared
Yeah.
to what I kind of need today. And so, I mean, I could break down and do it, but I'd rather have it on, on either a digital format where I can expand the lettering, or audio for sure. And I was like, oh yes, I still have about 7 credits on my audio thing. I blocked it because there was nothing else for me to listen. I was like, if those books come out, there was the first five or six books that I'm boom in on. So waiting for that stuff. And like I said, the Gary Gygax estate and the people that I've interviewed, they said that there's other stuff that was never published before that's in that estate as well.
Yeah.
So we could end up seeing a lot of other things, whether it be supplements for the games that Gary wrote, or maybe even whole new ideas that for game systems that we haven't seen yet. And so that is very exciting.
For sure, man. That'll be good to see.
So let's see if anyone else has any questions in here. I'm going to get to all of your things, your comments in the comments section. And if anybody else has any questions for Eric or myself, but he is by far much more experienced with this game system than I have. I simply just own it. I would love to see it played, so maybe someday, like Gary Con is on my bucket list, but that is a 15-hour drive for me, and it's very expensive. It's an expensive convention to go to, so that's the other thing that kind of puts it off for me. I was like, even if I drive, I would have to sleep on the way, so probably end up five days of hotel rooms, at least just to go. And airfare is ridiculous, right now to fly there and back again is a ridiculous amount. So I'll see. Hopefully someday I will get there. Let's see. The print is what we refer to affectionately as Bible print. The old that old print. Yes. It's tiny. It really is. So
Gore's words in red.
Let me grab a copy of. Let me grab my Gore novels here. So here is City of Hawks, and which I'm pretty sure is the City of Hawks is not the first. It's the
it's the first. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Then it's Gord the Rogue. No. So
Gord the Rogue's like 4th or something. It's like short stories.
Yeah. So yes, because he does have the ones that came under the Greyhawk Adventures line as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, I could read this, but it is kind of tiny, and here we go. Yeah, so other books: Saga of the Old City, Artifact of Evil, The Sea of Death, and Knight Errant. So I do finally have all of them. So that was a nice little adventure. I had to pick them all up, along the way.
There's Dance of Demons too, I think, right?
Yes. Let me see.
I forget what the other one is. Right before that, Come in Less Darkness, I think, is before Dance of Demons.
Let's see. Yeah, I have my books backwards here. So, here's Saga of the Old City.
Yep.
And then Artifact of Evil. Then the rest are Rose Estes. And then I have... And here are the 3 dangerous journeys. So Mythos 1, Anubis Murders, the Samarkand Solution, and Death in Delhi.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, nice little collection of Gary Gygax. Gary Gygax stuff. I'm probably missing a few here and there, but I'll spend that for the summertime. Start looking for things in between. Right now, I'm in convention mode, so
Yep.
getting ready to do my conventions, and then I will. Gary Con is a great one. You are more than welcome to bunk with my son and I. We're attending every year for the past 7 years. Well, I appreciate that. Like I said, my biggest issue with it is getting there. That's the biggest thing, and more so than the expense is just getting there. Yeah, but I really do appreciate that. That's something that I will have to consider. I forget what that's always in March. Yeah,
Usually, yeah.
I could try to convince my wife that because my birthday is in March, so like as a birthday present, I'm going away for 5 days. That's a tough sell. I'm telling you, that's a real tough sell. Unless I fly, but that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because
Like you said, I'm a lot closer, man. It's like just a day's journey essentially to get there.
yeah. Yeah. So let's see. Let me see what else I have in this Facebook group here that might be interesting for everyone. Okay, so let's see. So yeah, and it's a fairly small group. It is a private group, but there's 213 members. Yeah, Don Eccles is a group expert and top contributor. I just recently sent Dave Newton a friend request, which he accepted. I need to add Dave Eccles to it as well. Here's Greg Tim. So all the people you mentioned are pretty active here. I mean, as of May 20th, May 21st, 2 hours ago, Don Eccles. So yeah, this is an active community. So I highly recommend that anyone watching that is interested in Dangerous Journeys, you definitely join that chat channel, that YouTube, that Facebook group, Facebook group. And I'll make sure to put this up on their thing once it's finalized. Let's see. I can't share this yet, can I?
Because we're all definitely active because we also talk on Discord and through email, like at least every 3 or 4 days. We're going back and forth with the mechanics and things.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm definitely interested in getting much more involved with it, and I will. I see Don just put in recently a Magic Errata 2022 document.
Yep.
Back in April. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff in here.
A lot of people with keen eyes looking over things and always willing to throw down and start talking about rules in depth if anyone. And then just I posted some crazy stuff in there too. So go check it all out, man. Just type anyone's name in there and you'll see all the stuff that they've posted, or you can go into the files section. There's tons of stuff in there too.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, let me see what they have in files while we're here. And I can actually, let me do this. I am going to share screen. And let's see what I can do. There we go.
Have surprise Dangerous Journeys Day with your group.
Yeah. My group is pretty good with, so here is the Dangerous Journeys. You should be seeing this very, very soon on your screens. Yeah. So here is Dangerous Journeys on Facebook. Again, multi-genre RPG fans. And as I mentioned, so you said there's, let's see what's featured. Mythos 2 Google Drive.
That's a project that Ed Anderson is working on. It's not It's like his own version of Mythos, but
Okay,
he has done a great job doing something that's slightly different than the canon that we are all working on as a group. But he's got his own thing too, and it's super in depth and super creative. So if you want to get down a super creative rabbit hole, that's the place to go, because he's got all kinds of stuff there.
cool.
And then all the files that's listed on the
Yes. So I'm here
server.
in the files now, sharing the file screen, and
Like the epic one up there near the top, the second one, that is, or the third one, yeah. That one, for instance, is Greg Tim was the editor of the Epic of Earth, the core book that you have. And so he has, over the years, he's a historian too, and he has kept up on adding things that he was adding when he first started working on the book, and correcting things and stuff like that. So, I mean,
cool.
it's super up to date for such a niche
Yeah,
thing. You know, there's a lot of people
yeah.
keeping it up to date.
Let's see what this picture is. An image. Oh, it's not coming up on the preview. Let's see. Oh, it's just a signed copy of Epic Earth.
Oh.
All right, image. Yes. So
Somebody must have taken a picture of that.
yeah. So the bestiary addendum is let's see what this looks like. This is just a Word file.
Yeah, a lot of the expansions were in Word files that were never published, you know, and that's why
Right.
they never became part of any lawsuit. They just never got
Right.
off the ground, but they were in some cases, 95% done. And
Yeah.
the game is much more huge than you would realize on the surface without seeing all these things that just never got published and literally can't be published now because of Hasbro.
Right. Let's just take a look at this PDF of Mythos 2025 revision.
Yeah, that's the one that Dave did.
Yeah. Oh boy, look at that. That looks nice. With Ed Anderson. So fantasy role playing, 193 pages. So yeah, they certainly putting in time, right? Time and effort, and
That's the one I did the Hika Reservoir essay in, is in that one.
okay, cool. So yep, everyone definitely check out, joining this group, and taking advantage of all the free access materials that you have here, and let's start single boat boosting this
And
year.
tell Hasbro they cannot have your game.
Yes, yeah, it's
Not take your game away from you.
mine. It's mine. Yeah. So yeah, so a lot of really cool stuff there. So we played this system. Let's see. Let's catch up to something. So new to the gaming industry, is Horde Wars an okay place to start? I've only recently heard of Horde Wars. I haven't seen it yet. If you're new to tabletop role-playing games, I think that the best, in my opinion, the best is the D&D Red Box 1983. That is by far, in my opinion, the best introduction to tabletop role-playing. Kind of sets the tone for how your game should run. Great, easy to follow introductory adventure. But there's tons of other places to to start. Most companies do a pretty good job with their starter boxes, and maybe with the exception of fifth edition. D&D fifth edition. Their essentials box is good, but their other ones are way lacking. So I wouldn't bother with any of those. Troll Lord Games is coming out with a new starter set for Castles and Crusades. They also have the white box that you see behind me, or I moved it. It's right there now. And there's a lot of games out there. I mean, Shadow Dark is super easy to pick up with and run. Um, and then once you've kind of mastered or even nearly mastered some of those more simple systems, then you can dig into things like Dangerous Journeys or advanced Dungeons and Dragons or Castles and Crusades, the full versions of the games and whatnot, and start to get into much more complex, both on a game design level as well as you know um, just a little bit more mainstream kind of stuff. Although obviously, uh, Amazing Adventures, obviously, Dangerous Journeys is not mainstream, but it's certainly going to give you a different design philosophy that you're not going to see elsewhere, and a unique design philosophy that is still very, very useful to become aware of and to experience. Let's see. Ironically, it's our son and I dual birthday outing, February for me and March for him. Yeah, that's cool. I would definitely consider trying to get out there. So let's see. We played with the system many, many years. The world is still our world, even if we play 5e now. We play in slightly modified Epic of Earth, but basically the same. Cool. Um, and welcome. I don't recognize your name, so perhaps you're new to the channel. And let's see. So this is probably a question for you, Eric. So I think it's awesome that you are studying for this. For your thesis. Sorry, I might have misquoted as saying it's your thesis. It's just your most recent article, correct?
Yeah, I've already
Yeah,
graduated with a bachelor's and a
yeah,
master's. So I wrote it like right after I graduated. I graduated in December of last year, and I just all of a sudden didn't have nothing to do. And I was
yeah,
like, all right, I'm going to write this historical paper on dangerous journeys because I got all this information. And I know all these people. I still talk with these people, all these editors and
yeah,
stuff. So I interviewed all of them and all these other things and wrote that paper up because I didn't know how to handle being
yeah,
out of school
yeah,
for the first month. I was still in
yeah.
that like, oh, I got to write a paper, I'm sure. But yeah, I just did that out of love, man. I just really dig the game, and I wanted to represent it at GaryCon, make sure it was there, and I wanted to let people know what the history of it is, because it basically got stomped out of the zeitgeist by
Mhm.
TSR, and so it's like they didn't, like you pointed out, they don't do that anymore, right? Now they've got the open gaming
Right.
license, and they've got other vectors that they can produce things without it being copied. Back then it was tearing up people and lives. And in the paper I talk about Sean K. Reynolds, who was asked early in his career by TSR to go and set in on a Dangerous Journeys playtest at a convention and essentially spy on the
Yeah.
game to see if there was any danger. I'm not sure what the criteria was for the danger he was looking for, but he
Right.
said it's a game. Like he
Mm.
was put in a bad position. So a lot of corporate espionage and
Yeah.
bad faith dealing in court and such things that you just don't really see anymore. So it's a little time capsule of how things maybe used to be and aren't now.
I wish Lord Games would pick this up and make it for Castles and Crusades. I guess, and I mean, actually, I just wish they would republish it if they could. You know what I'm saying? And working with the people that are currently working with it and everything, if they're seeking a publication, but I don't think that anyone should take Dangerous Journeys and change its system to conform to a different system. Publish it as is.
Yeah.
Publish it in the way that it's intended to be. Not everything has to be a D20, two D20, or system. It could be, remain with the percentile die or remain with whatever system it was originally created for. And it doesn't need system mechanics, it needs publication. You know what I'm saying? So you you can go in different areas. I mean, that's the biggest flaw, I think, on Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast's whole approach to the IPs that they hold is they keep on thinking that if they produce, if they start republishing the IPs that they have, that they compete with one another, almost as if they don't belong to them. It's like it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like you'll make money from all of them. It's just I think that
It's
and I'll be called a hater for saying this, but they don't want the TSR competition to go against WotC's D&D because it will lose in the comparison every time. And that I think is what they're really protecting the D&D IP from today is that they know that those other game systems will outsell. So if they put out even like a Star Frontiers, which was one of its weakest of the percentile die systems, to be honest with you, great lore, great story behind it, great world setting and everything like that, but mechanically it was one of the weakest of them. But they would still compete really, really well against 5e, and that's what they're afraid of, is that they're afraid of that game system versus game system, they lose. All right. And that's why I think they stay away from it.
Before Peter sold Wizards of the Coast to Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast allowed Paizo to sell the PDFs of Dangerous Journeys through RPG Now.
Mm-hmm.
But once Hasbro,
Yeah.
or Paizo, I guess should say.
Yes. And well, thank you, Agile. And here, super chat. So I think it's awesome that you are studying this for your thesis. Oh, I already did that, but he reposted it. Legendary basis. So let's see. Have you compared Gary's other attempt at legendary rules, aka legendary adventures?
And in my opinion, which is worth every cent you paid for it, I feel like it was Gary's attempt to make Dangerous Journeys in a more simpler format.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of things that were very similar, a lot of things that flowed the same way, but he tried to take as much math and complication out of it as he could and
Mm-hmm.
take as much multi-genre aspects out of it as he could. And I didn't like it for that reason, because I felt like while all this was going on, you can read these commentaries in the Mythos Masters magazine, but there was also a huge backlash against how big these books was and how many rules there were and how the print was so small and stuff. And Gary was on there saying, look, it's like an encyclopedia. The intention is not to use everything from page 1 to page whatever. The intention is to pull out of it what works for you, what you find interesting, and what you want to use, right? But the level of detail is there if you want that level of detail. And people couldn't get that in their heads. They felt like they needed to master this whole thing in one go, which is why they made that book Zero. Like, they made the book Zero because the book Zero reprints everything that's in the very front of the core book. It reprints all of that because it was already in the core book. They just took it out because it made the core book look not so big, and it made the beginning set look smaller. And they thought, well, maybe we can bring people in this way. But by the time they started doing that, they were losing their money in the courts, so it just never got anywhere. And Dave Newton was the one that was tasked with that too. He was the one that was tasked with shoring up a basic set of Dangerous Journeys, so he had to change a few things, and the mechanics are actually a little bit different. It's kind of like a Holmes basic set going into a kind of a thing.
Yeah. I have to go back. Mentioning the world setting. So the Epic of Earth world, not the system. Yes.
The Epic of Earth was basically just like our planet, except that it had all of the legendary places that we have thought of, like Atlantis, High Brazil, Hyboria, and the island of Lamu and Lu. There may have been one other thing in there somewhere around Australia, and the whole Mediterranean was bigger. Like they cut
Yeah.
out part of Africa and made this huge Mediterranean area. So it's like an alternate Earth setting, and
Yes.
it's supposed to be about 1,000 years behind our current setting.
Yeah.
So if it's 2025, it should be 1025 in the Epic of Earth.
In the
And
upper. Yeah.
yeah, and there's also like there's from ancient to Renaissance technological levels. So like there's technology that borders on steamships and
Mhm.
steam engines, but they're extremely unstable because magic works in mythos and not science. So science is
Right.
the risky thing and such.
Mhm. Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, there was a lot of interest as soon as, and people are talking about, I'm really interested in the system. And I saw that in the comment section, of that live stream when, you had mentioned it and all of a sudden, boom, oh, yeah, I would love to see, hey, are you going to go back to covering this more so on your channel? And I was like, yeah, it kind of fell off my radar for such a long time, because I've had these books now for probably going back like 3 years or more. And I was like, yeah, I do got to get around to, going back to this and doing those, comparison videos take a lot of time because you have to read both of them pretty well, to then start doing the compare and contrast, so yes, and there's so many new systems coming out and other things and the stuff that I'm actually running right now and but I'd love to have these things kind of crop up, especially organically on the channel and say, hey, can you focus on this? And yeah, I'll always fall to that. I was like, yeah, absolutely, I will focus on that. And so it's nice because it might have been quite a long time before I actually thought on my own, let's go back and start looking at Dangerous Journeys again. You know, I'm kind of going through my shelves like little, like just showing what I have there and, what I am running or what I, probably will never run, but it's just something I really like having. Or, I recently had one where I was like, yeah, this is like one of my regretful purchases. It was like a total waste and, which I have very, very few of those, but it was like, you know what? And I'll eventually get to the shelf that these are on, although it'll probably be a couple months before I actually get there. And so I'm glad that this came up because now I can spend a little time talking about it. And myself, I'm surprised at how much people want to look at this system, and that tells me that there's a shift in the hobby, and I think it's a very, very positive shift where people are looking to see other stuff that's out there, and they're looking to see older stuff that is out there, and the old school is moving in forward. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? So what is considered old school is moving forward. So now early 90s is starting to become old school, right?
yeah, yeah.
It's 30 plus. My measurement is if it's 30 years or older, it's old school, and so you're starting to get, 95 and back now is old school, it's 30 years old. It's like, time moves on. And so what's considered old is going to move on along with that time,
Yeah.
and, I've told this story several times on my channel, but the first time I really started thinking of it that way was, it was a Sunday morning and I'm driving in my car. And for whatever reason, I put on an AM channel and I'm listening to the morning oldies. All right. And so morning oldies and Guns N' Roses comes on. And I'm like, what the hell? I was like, how is Guns N' Roses on the morning oldies? And it made me feel old, number one, you
Welcome
know,
to the
uh,
geriatrics.
and so it made me feel old. And then because I'm always thinking about gaming and everything, I was like, geez, I mean, we're going to have to recategorize what is considered old school, based on that same concept, and I mean, it's not quite like it's not quite the same pattern as like comic books. Like the silver anniversary. 25 years is an important year. I don't think 25 years really sets your new category of tabletop role-playing games. I think that a little bit more longevity than that in its segments of what's considered old or contemporary or whatnot. And so, but yeah, it definitely made me think. I was like, wow, old school has to move forward, just like time is moving forward. And
Yeah.
at some point, with the 50th anniversary coming up, so or exceeded now with D&D, last year being the 50th anniversary, that might not be old school anymore. That might be, the golden age, or I'm not going to call it ancient history, but certainly a I forget what you call in between old and ancient. So yeah, I don't know.
Well seasoned.
Yeah, well seasoned. I don't know. It's like it's not quite decrepit, but it's not, I don't have to put a negative.
Intermediary.
Yeah, intermediary, or I don't know what becomes. So somebody can come up with a category for it. So old school is a game more than it is an age of it. 20 years from now, theater is not going to be old school. Well, it depends on, and welcome Dice Tales. It depends on systematically if it's a dramatic change, right? So like I was saying earlier on, like we in our generation, when we were growing up, or I may be like slightly old. Well, I know I'm probably older than Eric here.
I'm 55. So
yeah. Oh, you're 55. All right. So we're the same generation then. So I'm 58. So I had said earlier on that like our game systems, our game style was much more different. And I know you're talking about game style, but in the 80s, in the early 80s, there wasn't necessarily a game style as far as system is concerned. We were much more open, and maybe I'm just speaking for my own gaming group, but we were much more open to playing multiple genres, multiple game systems all at the same time. We weren't just playing D&D. We were playing D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Twilight 2000,
Stormbringer, Gamma World,
Stormbringer, yeah, right, Sword Bearer,
Hill.
like really obscure things, Bushido. But I mean, there was
Dangerous Journeys.
Yeah, I have a whole shelf of stuff that I played back in the early 80s that is literally like 6 different genres. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and that isn't the style of today, or at least these past 15 years or so. I think it's starting to become more of a gaming style over the last, let's say 5 years or so, with new genre games coming out. Like Call of Cthulhu has always been, there. Warhammer has always been there, which has that aspect of it.
Tunnels and Trolls.
Tunnels and Trolls. But I'm just saying, like we see things like Mothership, or Alien, or those kinds of genres that are coming out of other IPs and other movie-based genres.
Space 1999.
Yeah. So I think it's becoming much more broad, the genre, than just the style. So do I think we're going to see new games built around, like the D100 system? Maybe not. I think they're pretty rare. Right now that you're working purely off a percentile system, unless they're retro clones. What I'm saying? So I'm excluding retro clones and everything. So I mean, sure, it might be more than just an age of something, but those game systems, when you go back 30 years or more, are dramatically different than what we see today. I think that you're starting to like compare D&D 5th edition to D&D First Edition, you're going to see very little connection between the two. I mean, they're dramatically different games, and so I agree to a certain extent that yes, it's more than just an age thing, but I think over that kind of a time span, you're having mechanical differences as well.
Yeah, it's like you're moving from the simulation era where things were trying to simulate
Yeah.
physics as close as possible, even the physics of fireballs and dragon breath.
Right.
And now we're moving into more of a stylistic age. Like I
Right.
recently have read The Expanse, Alien, and The One Ring, and a couple of other ones that are new. And all of them have really specific mechanics for their very specific backgrounds that they are operating in. Like Space 1999, Alien has horror mechanical themes, and The One Ring has mechanical themes that harken into the Tolkien-esque idea of epic fantasy, and the Expanse has specific mechanics to mirror the tension that was building through the plots of the books and the episodes. So it's almost like we're abandoning the idea of this very open world that has rules for simulating general things in physics to rules that are very specific to the genre that they're set within, and cater to a certain theme of horror or science fiction or exploration, as opposed to being more like a catch-all. Because
Right.
back when when we was playing first edition D&D, which I'm still playing that, but you could almost throw anything at that, right?
Yeah.
You could throw just about any genre in there and it would work on those same rules. And eventually, even in the section in the DMG, Six Guns and Sorcery,
Yeah.
right? And combining campaigns, they were saying, these things are kind of similar and you could probably make them similar and jump people around. And of course, we did that. I would take the AD&D characters to Boot Hill, the Gamma World, and those worlds were linked for us.
Yeah.
But they were solidly linked because those were the rules, right? Like they weren't open
Right.
genre,
Right.
but you could put stuff in there,
Yeah.
you could, and it was a system would hold. But now imagine trying to put in Space 1999 science fiction into your Alien game,
Right.
right? Like the
Yeah.
mechanics would be so foreign. Or even the Star Wars game, where they've had the theme dice now that you roll,
Right.
and
Right. Right.
depending on
Right.
what the rolls are, you're basing your narrative description off of these dice. Whereas before, you kind of did this math and you either made a certain threshold or you didn't, and then you based your narrative off of that.
Yeah.
But they've taken the dice risk out, right? It used to be like, God, I hope I make the saving throw, please,
Yeah.
right? And now it's like there's like a lot of that's gone. Now there's no games that come out and say just one roll that you miss might completely end your character. They pad it a little bit more with story,
Right.
which there's. I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, if you're really wanting to experience a certain kind of a story, like if you want to break out your Alien game on Halloween and have the horror themed adventure, that's great, right? But for just general play all the time, I want something that I can throw anything at. That's one of the reasons why I liked Dangerous Journeys so much, is
Right.
it was just easy to do stuff in it.
Yeah. Uh, we have more time because I personally didn't do homework until the morning of at school and then during morning breakfast. So I had plenty of time. We used to game 6 to 7 days a week. All right. Which was another thing that, we just, especially in the 80s and everything, our parents typically did not, we were feral, right? So we'd leave the house. We were expected to leave the house, and not come back until, the street lights came on, kind of thing. So, and we,
Truly expect it to do that.
yeah,
Truly expect
yeah,
it to do that.
yeah. It was like, yeah, I don't want to see you, I want to see you go off to school and I don't want to see you again until and then, well, dinner time, you had to come in and then you could go back out again. And then you had to be back by, street lights come on. Now, my family, we didn't start eating until like 6 o'clock ish or something like that. And schools used to let out a lot earlier than they do today too. So I used to be home by like 2 o'clock. So we could game every single day from like 2 to 6, and still get home for dinner, So, and we literally, we would play like 5 hours sometimes a day, every single day, including Saturday, and Sunday was the only day that we really didn't have that much time for gaming. And I was usually doing house chores and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was just, we had much more time for gaming. And and school was less intensive, than it was, like shorter days. And you know it just wasn't like it is today. I would imagine, for I mean, I was a teacher for 26 years, so I know that, it kind of ebbed and flowed during the, over the decades of how much schoolwork there was to, and we kind of, went along that. I was always a not very big on homework because the kids usually don't do it anyway. So it's like, now I want you to do all your learning in the classroom and not at home. So I never bogged my students down with homework, probably because I was like that same kind of student. I was like, I ain't doing this until I'm sitting there in morning breakfast and trying to get it done, the class period before it was due. Let the Renaissance begin. Yes. And I think we are in a new Renaissance. We're in a time when a lot of people are opening themselves up to, growing their experience with different game systems. I think it's a great time in the hobby, that we're in right now.
And like in most renaissances and most reformations, once this gets underway, people tend to go back to what they consider to be the source. Like with the Reformation, people went back to Paul of Tarsus in the New Testament to see what he was saying to his first 8 churches in the Greek East in Corinth, right? And
Yeah.
people will go back to Gary Gygax and see, well, what was being written and how were they handling things at this time. And I think that's really interesting, to find something new. A lot of times people go back to the beginning to see what the point was in the beginning. And like for me, I always try to describe it to people that the point in the beginning was, obviously the whole simulation sand table war games and Avalon Hill hex-based games was in full swing at this time. But essentially people were going off and reading books like John Carter of Mars or the Tolkien books, right? And wanting to recapitulate the things that they read about because they couldn't just share that with their friends by telling them the story. Don't tell me the story, I might read it, right? But if you could bring them into the story and simulate that story, it was almost a more grand experience than actually reading the linear story. I think a friend of mine that wrote one of those world builder books, the Insade book, Dan Cross, he just called this discovered plot. It's like in a book or a story that's linear, there's plot, there's subplot and story, right? But in a role-playing game, there's discovered plot. And it's like where things that you can find out or do that matter, but if you don't find out and do, they don't influence the story in an overarching way unless you discover them, which is something you can't do in a book. You can't get that book to give you anything but the story that it has for you. But in a role-playing game, you're able to manipulate plot, subplot, discover plot, and story branching activities on a whim. So, yeah.
I'm trying to catch up on. Yeah, I'm trying to catch up on some of these things too. So they are talking about Pendragon. Does Pendragon fall within the category of old school? I'm not sure. I know like Call of Cthulhu has advanced itself through the years, right? And so is Call of Cthulhu an old school game? If you're playing second edition, yes. If you're playing seventh edition, no. So it has evolved over time, and so it's kind of crossed over the various, old school, new school kind of, not just mechanically, but in game design theory. All right, it has advanced itself. It has moved forward. I mean, D&D does the same thing, right? You have old school D&D and you have modern D&D. Two very different feeling games, so it really depends on what edition you're talking about. you know um there are modern games that have an old school feel, and a lot of times it'll be described that way, right? So like Shadow Dark, modern mechanics, old school feel. Um, the old school feel of it is the grittiness of it, the danger of it, you're not dealing with a lot of hit points, and a single sword strike, can kill you with one strike if you're low level enough. And
Or even bad decisions can kill you. Like,
yeah,
for instance, putting on a cloak of poisonous. If you read that
yeah,
straight out of the first edition DMG, it's
yeah,
like, look, just tell the character they're dead. And if they really want to, they can roll 1,001 save versus poison or dies, but they're probably not going to make 1,001 saving throws in a row.
right,
And it
yeah,
literally says that in the book, right?
yeah,
So I remember there's one in the Temple of Elemental Evil. It's a cloak that's over a statue where these statues are in a circle. And I remember a player once got the cloak, and by the rules of D&D, you can't tell what it is. Looks like a normal cloak unless you actually don the cloak, right?
yeah.
And I'm like, do you don the cloak? I donned the cloak. You're dead.
Hmm,
I'm dead?
hmm,
Yeah, you're dead.
hmm,
Do I get a saving throw? No, you're already dead.
hmm.
What do
Yeah,
you mean? Well, you can try it. You need 1,001, it says in the book. You're like,
yeah,
one, two, no, I'm dead. I mean,
yeah,
it's just so harsh, man.
yeah,
All you did is decided to put a cloak on,
yeah,
and that's it. You're dead. Like, that's harsh.
yeah. So let's see. Paranoia seems to be the same from 1E to 2E, and it worked well. Yeah. I mean, some game systems, they do hold on to their roots, for the most part. And I mean, Castles and Crusades from 1999, when they first started writing it, to today, the core game mechanics are virtually the same. They don't even call it new editions, they call it new printings. Thank you very much, Agile, for this. And yeah, for everyone out there who has relatives that may have passed in service, thank you so much for their service, and thank you for your sacrifice as well.
Yes, thank you.
And as someone I consider veterans who have passed since, not just those as being part of my Memorial Day celebration as well. My father was a World War II vet. Obviously not killed during World War II, but he passed in 2008, and just the last surviving member of his engineer company, his engineer battalion, just passed away this week. He was 100 years old and just passed away. So condolences and best wishes moving forward to his family as well. So yeah, it's a holiday that we celebrate, and yet it's kind of weird to use the word celebrate. So I just say remembrance, and like you say, remember, never forget. And so thank you for that, and for that reminder again, for that as well. So let's move on to another comment here. Kind of learn base paranoia. So that's where I left off. Many game systems back in the day, but then again, most rule books weren't 300-page behemoths. Yeah, and they didn't tell us to focus too much on the rules. To a greater extent, like Eric had mentioned earlier, right? It's like, yeah, these are big books, but you're not supposed to use them all. Um, so mechanics, yeah, I'm just looking for things that really kind of stand out. Mechanics for death and a lot of other events as well, documented, which are part of what makes it fun, but it's not old school. Yeah, they're talking about maybe Pendragon. They're going into Pendragon talk, which I do not have. So I'm not too aware. All hail the feral generation. Yes, yes, it was the best time. So Arthur version of Stormbringer. Yeah, the was King Arthur. I always thought it was King Arthur version of Stormbringer. Yeah, I never played Stormbringer either. I had Sword Bearer. I love that game, Sword Bearer, which was Fantasy Grounds Unlimited. I think that was a great system. And we used to play Gore. So the Gore series, we were playing that using Stormbringer and Sword Bearer, and it kind of matched that whole feel of it as well. So yeah, love that. I mentioned so many games, I don't know which game I mentioned when you made this comment. I try to keep up with the comments. So let's see. See, I counted for that. I mean, parent to parent confirmation, that would be inside. Sorry about that. So many comments. That's great. Let's see what this is. I think what distinguishes old is that you go with rulings, not mechanics. Call of Cthulhu has had mechanics since day one. It played very different than old school games. Yeah, you know what? I can see that, right? It was a very mechanic oriented game system. Like you had the insanity rules. There was no getting around them. You know what I'm saying? There was no, there was no saving throws necessarily, for those things. Yeah, it was like it just was what it was. You were losing sanity, and you were losing the number of points that, either the game master rolled or you rolled or whatnot, and that was it. And once your sanity dropped to 0, you were basically an NPC at that point. It was like you lost control of your character, and your character was essentially done for. And I used to say there was like, there was only like 3 outcomes in a an old school, like older edition of Call of Cthulhu. Your character went insane, your character died, or your character fled the entire scene before he or she delved too deeply into anything, but that was it. There was the only success was survival. That was the only way to succeed, was to actually survive. And it was very rare for you to survive with your mental abilities fully intact, or physical or whatnot. It was like, and that's why, doing those adventures, and you can see this in H.P. Lovecraft's writing too, was that he had very few adventures or short stories that involved the same protagonist. It was like, Charles Dexter Ward was the only one that I think of that went through like maybe 2 or 3 storylines, and then that was it. Everyone else was just singular, and that's how, when we played it played very much the same way. Very rarely did we have characters repeat, and go through more than one adventure. They were always like, whoever got to the end of this, that was it. And you never did another. You rolled up new characters every time you played it another time. So just a totally different concept, I think, of what would be acceptable. It's kind of hard to put it in, like, I don't want to say like even these last 5 years, because there have been so many changes these last couple of years, just in the tone of the hobby and the openness of the hobby to look at other game systems now. So I don't want to kind of say the modern game era is inclusive of these last 3 years. Let's say, I think that there was a definite shift in these last couple of years. But yeah, so yeah, some good context here, some good discussions going on. I mean, I've had people say that Traveler isn't old school. It absolutely is old school. It's like it absolutely is. Not only is it old school, but it was actually it actually established game design theory. I'll let you jump in on that, Eric, too.
I mean, I never actually played Traveler, man. So I was never one of those people that got into playing Traveler. But I
Yeah,
do know that your character can die while you're rolling up your character. That
mm,
sounds pretty old school and
yeah,
mechanically.
yeah. Uh, even in its character generation that you can do like online now. Like you can do that, you can run them through several cycles of training, and yeah, they can die. Today they can die on their character generator. The online character generator. So yes, it's but that's not necessarily what made it old school. It's like old school games, and some modern games do this as well, but fewer. Um, they just set a new design philosophy in motion. A new design. Just total. So I guess like a blades in the dark kind of shift for a more modern game, right? It just changes the way people think about playing games. If you want to see game systems that just go so far outside of the box and everything, you look at anything that like Runehammer is doing. So you look at like Crown and Skull is like, I don't know if you've ever read Crown and Skull, but if you read that first, that initial rule book of it, it's like, and try to, at least me, I try to wrap my head around it. I was like, this is so far out of the box of anything else that came before it, that it's like, this is just this whole new thing, and you might not see it anywhere being played anywhere, other than at his own shop. You know what I'm saying? But to have it on your shelf and to refer to it and to look at it, just to wrap your head around some game theory, it's incredible. It's an incredible system. And there's a lot of the parts that you can take it and port it over into other things, but as a collective, it's just mind-boggling how you can come up with something so innovative. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I guess it also depends on how you define old school, like the difference between mechanics and rulings. Before first edition, when there was just the original box set or the Holmes set, right?
Yeah.
Um, there was like one of the reasons that they made Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition was because the rules for the role playing games that existed until that time were so sketchy and so light, like 10, 20 tables and 90 paragraphs worth of information, and you were expected to kind of figure out the rest.
Yeah.
You had to get the parts for it. You had to maybe sometimes get other games like Outdoor Adventures
Mhm.
to do things, and then it was up to you to figure out how you wanted to use these pieces to tell your story.
Right.
So when people would show up at conventions, they had all of these different rulings for
Yeah.
different things, right? And there was no way they could do tournament scenarios
Mhm.
because there were so many old school, so to speak, rulings that where our group does this way and our group does it this way and this sort of thing, right? Because there's no definition. So one of the reasons why they started the rules heavy, simulation heavy, draw from things like Avalon Hill. Of course, Gary had made the game Alexander before for
Yeah.
Avalon Hill before he ever did D&D and stuff, and he was famous for those morale tables that he put in that.
Mm.
And so he was the one who really started to try to hammer down on this is the way you do it. This is the advanced Dungeons and Dragons way. And you can find several articles in Dragon Magazine where he's saying you either play advanced Dungeons and Dragons or you play some sort of derivative of it, right?
Mhm.
Either you're using the rules as stated in the book or you're doing something else. So there was sort of a dichotomy at that point. Like, so real old school was making your own rulings because there simply wasn't enough examples of what was going on for there to be any precedence to
Right.
look to. So you had variety and you had more creativity in a sense. But then once the era of here are the specific tables, the specific way, the specific procedure on how you handle turn undead or whatever it is, or psionics, and I think the Traveler falls into this, and pretty much every game after that, right there, it
Right.
became more strict in how we're going to proceed playing this kind of a game. So that became to some people what old school was. In other words, adherence to the rules, even if they're going to kill your character, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to rolling your dice behind the screen and saying, well, you only took one hit point, but you got to be careful, right? You're
Yeah.
rolling out in the open, and good luck. You put on the cloak. So yeah, I mean, it really defines on how you're going to define old school. Originally old school was making rulings, and then eventually it became adherence to a certain set of rules that might arbitrarily kill your character. And in Traveler's case, they seem to have built that in as sort of a tongue-in-cheek sort of a thing. Like, yeah, this is how you would do it now. And then later on, in more modern games, they've kind of done away with both of those things. They've done away with complete open-endedness and put genre in that, or themes like movie themes or really specific themes like Marvel or whatever. And they've done away from the simulation part too, and they've made the rules kind of cater to that whole style. So
Yeah.
it's they went from really open-ended, and I think you can see there's Kuntz, who has written books recently, called the one about Dave Arneson,
Yes, I have that.
True Genius, and then there's the
Genius.
other one he did after that called The Fourth Category. It's like a sequel to that.
Right.
And in both of those books, he laments a lot about how they took away that beginning open-endedness to it, where you could use Universal Studio monsters and random dungeons that you drew and some other experience or story and just blend it all together and go. That he says those days are long gone for corporate defined rules and scenarios and all of that. So yeah, I mean, wherever you draw the line, I suppose.
Yeah. It's an interesting debate as to what is considered old school or not, and is it tied to just the number of years? Is it tied to a philosophy of gaming? Is it tied to rulings over rules or game mechanics or whatnot? And or is it a combination of all those things? And it's like, and you kind of know it when you see it, kind of thing, right? It's like,
like they said in the pornography case in the court battle, it when you see it.
Yeah. So it's like an interesting thing. Like, I wanted to touch on this here. So I remember the days when a new edition meant just an updating of the format and look of the book rather than new rules. And for the most part, that's why, like Troll Lord Games and Castles and Crusades, they call it printings, because that's all they really do change from one to the other, with a few exceptions. Like I came across in 2010, James Ward joined to rework the encumbrance system. All right. They also reworked, I believe, the Monk and the Barbarian. All right. So that was like the most significant rules changes that they had made in the game system from 2004, when it was first published, until 2010. And then since 2010, it has not changed other than formatting and layout and additional art and maybe tweaking a few minor things here and there. Now, in their most reforged edition that they did, where they removed all of the OGL, basically, and any of the nomenclature that might have been connected even to the new SRDs and Creative Commons stuff, they wanted to be totally removed from it. And so with the newest version, the only thing that they did that, which I personally didn't like, was they removed the spell block, so where you could read like the spell's details, and they removed it from that block format to just a descriptive thing. So you have to read the entire description, and it'll just be in bold all of the numerical qualities of the spell, right? So range and the actual effects and whatnot, and saving throws and whatnot, are all in a text-based version of it. Almost like a modern math problem that doesn't have the formulas anymore. They just have, it's all a word problem, and even the numbers are written out in word form, and you have to extract it to write, to write the formula on the other side, other side of the page, so you have to convert it from from um, from verbal to mathematical equation, and then solve the mathematical equation, and then express your answer in verbal again. So I'm saying it's like what? It's like, that's the difference between old school and new school, right? And that's a great example of old school and new school. Is that old school isn't always more complicated, you know, um, compared to new school, and new school isn't always a an improvement of of what was old school as well. So so yeah, updating and formatting, and that's not always a positive too, because you can format in the wrong direction and create something that is not easier to use, than that. So, but anyway, yeah, that's an interesting point to bring out, that new editions generally meant just an updating of format and such, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do go beyond that, and they change they change the way that the game system actually fundamentally works. I mean, I'll use fifth edition Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Um, Basically removed all of the racial differences, the traits and the attribute modifiers and whatnot. And as soon as they did that, they fundamentally changed the Dungeons and Dragons to being a game system where there was absolutely no advantage to playing any particular race. There was previously the reason why they had them in there, and they had those things, according to Gary, was that he was like, no, it's an essential function to have racial traits, and racial abilities, and then attribute modifiers and level limits based on race. So like an elf can only become an 11th level magic user, let's say. And because if he didn't do that, no one would ever play a human, because the humans would then have no advantages whatsoever, and so that was the one thing. So when Tasha's came around and made it, well, you can do whatever you want, and I know the RPG pundit actually described that very, very well. Is like everyone's player character became an amorphous glob of gray goo. All right, and you're just going to throw a skin on it and say, well, this is an elf now. It has all of the traits of a dwarf, but it's an elf, or this is my halfling, but he's 7 feet tall because he's he's a halfling in the body of a half ogre, player character. Now it just didn't make any sense, and it stripped the game system. So you can have formatting differences, and it have significant rules, mechanics, consequences for that. So that's where I stand on that. I'll let you go, Eric.
One of the things I really liked about Dangerous Journeys and the Epic of Earth and Mythos is that when you were talking about things like level limitations for elves, and they can only be 11th level, for instance, at the best. And the reason why, like you said, because no one would play a human, and it's supposed to be a human-centric world, according to the Greyhawk, right? And one of the things Gary did when he did Epic of Earth was there are no demi-humans at all that are indigenous to the planets. They're all in the counter world of Fairy. So they only come across through gateways or doors, right? It's super rare. And like, for instance, there's only been 2 or 3 times in my games that demi-humans have been prominently a part of what was going on, because they're just that rare. There's only been a couple of times they went to the counter world of Fairy. But the idea that he kept those 2 things apart, and then he made the Epic of Earth inimical to some of the people from the fairy side. In other words, like iron affects them a lot stronger, and they are susceptible to things that are natural here. So it's not their normal environment. They typically don't want to stay here, and they're not trying to take over the planet because it's just not healthy for them. So that really solved things like having level limitations and human-centric world, and why elves aren't taking over if they live for 15,000 years, and
Right.
why elven magic doesn't rule, and why they're not trying to take over the planet. Like, they might build forts or underground societies to raid us, to take back to their world, but they're not trying to come up from the Underdark, for instance, and take over the surface, because that's. So I thought that was really elegant, much like the non-vital, vital hit locations, as opposed to actual arm, leg, head, or sort of a situation.
Yeah, it's a, and Gary was very much a game theorist. When it came to those things, it was important for him, and there was always an ulterior motive for game mechanics that he suggested were essential mechanics. And it would have been great if he actually said these are the essentials. He never came straight out and said anything, but there were a few. Like, I remember in one article he had written that or mentioned, or maybe it was an interview, whatever. The purpose of the alignment system, and he called it an essential system, wasn't a game mechanic issue. It was a player control issue. All right. He says, without an alignment system, the players will not be incentivized to function as they're in a heroic fantasy. All right. And before the term murder hobo was ever bandied about, but he basically said, otherwise they'll just kill everything they encounter, because the game mechanics are geared towards you leveling up based on combat XP and loot XP, and then they'll just see, well, why think this through when we can just kill everything, and move
For
forward.
the experience points and the money.
Yes, and that's where he said, no, I want people to think about, I want the player to think that I am playing a heroic character, and I am supposed to be genuinely good. Now, he specifically said, that doesn't mean you can't play an evil campaign. All right, but just be mindful that the game system is going to work against you. All right, and that's where he first started bringing up there will be PvP in that, because your evil characters will start seeing, hey, there's an advantage. I'm going to get a lot of experience and treasure from killing this guy than fighting those, and they'll start infighting and do that kind of thing. And then you're going to run into issues of where both powers of good and evil are tracking you down, because evil will track down other evil that they see as a competition, and
you can't trust anyone.
Yeah, you can't trust anyone. And so he says they might be incredibly fun campaigns to play, but they're going to be short-lived.
Yeah,
and that's the other thing that conceptually Gary was always into. Other than tournament play at conventions, but he really, thought of, the campaign as being something that is long lasting.
Yeah.
Not 6 sessions, or not 12 sessions, or, things that last years, year longs. And that is something that I think is important to, keep in mind too, that his game theory and his philosophy is long term, and that's certainly not, that's old school. All right, that's an old school concept that doesn't translate to modern games. Now I see some game systems will be arguing, oh no, you can do a long-term campaign in here. How if it ends after level 10? Are you really, or in the case of like 5e, it's like most campaigns are starting the player characters at 5th level, so they're skipping 1 through 4, and they're only playing 6 sessions. All right, and that's according to Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, saying, you know, most don't start out at the lower levels because those characters aren't as much fun for them to play. They don't have enough powers, you know, and yet they're keeping their sessions down to about 6 sessions on average, because then they get bored with those characters. They have no longevity
Yeah.
of truly developing characters. You know, there's less role playing in modern gaming than there was back
Less
in old
attachment to the
school.
character.
Yeah.
I tell my players that alignment is a contract between me and them. So that if you tell me you're going to play a good character, and then I go off and I devise that the princess has been abducted and is now being held in the evil wizard's tower, and then I set the game in motion, I'm going to then have them follow up and make sure they're going to rescue her and then not take her and ransom her to the
Mhm.
king to get money back themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because that would be against the alignment that they professed at the beginning of character creation.
Mhm.
To that end, I always, in every first edition game, have a alignment graph that I pass around at the beginning of every game, so people clearly know where they're at on the graph based on what they have done in prior games. And some people will even modify their behavior to push the graph in another direction if they start
Yeah.
slipping, or if they're solidly in one part of the graph, they may do something a little crazy that they know they shouldn't because they've had good karma built up.
Yeah.
But you know, we usually I won't let them play any kind of evil, and they did talk me into doing a whole campaign once. And usually our campaigns last between a year and a half and 3 years.
Mhm.
We did this whole campaign. It took about 6 months, where they wanted to all play evil characters, and I started them out in Veluna, where they typically walk down the streets sometimes with detect good and evil just to make sure the riffraff is being kept out. They ended up being drove all the way to the peninsula of the Pormarge, where they thought they were going to set up shop and then realized they couldn't trust anyone. They
Yeah.
eventually fell in with some people that betrayed them and
Mhm.
killed them, you know, so it, you know, it wasn't what they thought, but they did have fun.
Yeah.
And even to that end, like when I'm describing alignment language to them, I tell them that alignment language is like a series of words and gestures that it's like a political thing, right? It's like if you go into a bar and it's a conservative bar and there's people maybe wearing MAGA hats and have certain dress or whatever, wherever they're at, and they can see that these people are displaying certain alignment, that without saying I'm this particular alignment, they're broadcasting it at you, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever the political
Mhm.
division would be. You can kind of take a look and you can kind of read the crowd and tell by their dress and their gestures and the things that they're saying, the words that they're using, what their alignment probably is, right? And that's but the reason why in first edition I tell them that it says there, you know, that usually you don't just go and profess what your alignment is supposed to be, a faux pas, but because that's like going into a
Yeah.
room and just espousing your religious or your political beliefs straight up front, laying all your cards right. Nobody does that, and if so, that's probably not someone you want to hang out with, right?
Yeah.
But you kind of conceal it and you kind of play it cool. But if you watch, you'll see the telltale signs that says, you know, this person is a Christian or this person may
Yeah.
be a Muslim. So that's kind of how I'm
Yeah.
describing alignment language to them. And of course, you can have these conversations once you get to know someone personally and you sit down with them and say, let's have a really in-depth conversation. I really want to know what you think politically about things, and if you're friends, right? And so you open up and you talk. That's a whole different thing. That's not being like in a group of a large people. You can actually talk in alignment
Right.
language,
Right.
that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I love alignment in first edition, and I love it for the very reason that Gary put it there, which is player control, the
Yeah.
contractual agreement, right?
Yeah.
There is no alignment system in Dangerous Journeys. There's
Right.
an ethos, and there is no encumbrance that's associated with any of the Dangerous Journey stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, it's a, you know, it's an important thing to, you know, to keep in mind. You know, you mentioned like social contracts, and then those are really important for your whatever game you're running. Actually, is to have a good understanding of, this is what things are going to, you know, you know, these are the expectations, of, the table expectations. These are the expectations I have of you as players. These are the expectations that you can have of me as your game master. This is what I think that the world will kind of look like for you, kind of basically theme and, what we're looking for, but there's flexibility in there as well, so it's not going to be, very railroaded, but it's going to be something where you'll have the general tone of what the campaign, and then what do you want to do kind of thing, let's see where you take this. And, and I found that even though in my own AD&D first edition campaign, which I'm on my second one now, so we're several months in, and my previous one was 2 years and 3 months long, before I felt that those characters have kind of run their course through. They were at the higher levels now, like a level 12-ish or so, for the most part. But I never have them really focus too much on their alignment, because they kind of fall into those alignment ranges, that, I'm like, all right, I can kind of see where they're going, except for the clerics and or the paladins. So that, there's a cleric in the group, and I was like, what are your deity's domains? I want to hear you mention your character is doing something every single day that matches that domain. So if your god is the god of light, how are you bringing light into the world? It could be lighting a candle. It doesn't have to be lighting a thing. You have to do a ceremony every single day in order to have your spells for tomorrow. And I was like, but I'm not going to charge you on your spell slots. You get a freebie. All right. For every wisdom bonus you have, you will have a ceremony that you can cast for that day. So save one for the special purpose of, getting ready for your spells. But if you don't do some kind of a demonstration of your deity's, domains during that day, you're not going to have new spells tomorrow. And I found that is a much better role-playing way of showing that connection to your deity than just saying, I'm neutral good and my deity is a neutral good, and I'm trying to kind of,
Neutral good stuff.
in an undescribed way, a very non-specific way of being neutral good. I think the domains are more important, and I'd rather have them do that than to just stay within this alignment range. Then I just recently had a debate with somebody. We're like, oh no, alignment is, the axis. You have to be this. You have to be this. I was like, but even the deity doesn't require all of its worshipers being that one specific thing. There's always a slight range in there that they can have multiple.
So or also like all fighters, for instance.
Yeah. So it's like, so if you have a, lawful, a lawful neutral, a lawful neutral deity, then your paladin could be lawful neutral. As long as a paladin is lawful in some way, then you can have a paladin of that, of that deity. It could be lawful neutral. The lawful is the more important part of it, following some kind of a code or something, and then get back to what are the domains? How lawful are you towards those domains? And that I think is more important than anything else as far as that's concerned. So it makes a much more, I think, nuanced look at alignment, but it's still holding the alignment as an essential, certainly for those character classes, so far more than any of the others. I've actually adopted like Robert Kuntz's view of druids, because he has that awesome adventure, Dark Druids.
Okay.
And these druids are neutral evil. I mean, it's like so the neutrality is the key there, not necessarily the true neutral, but you could be neutral evil, neutral good, and he had both of them, in there, neutral evil and neutral good deities, and I mean druids, and they violated the world of Greyhawk's limitations of level 12. Yeah, they were running up like level 16 hierophants and all this. I was like, so I was like, leave it to the old school, like legendary, people to kind of, rulings rather than rules, break all the rules that everybody else was told, oh, you're supposed to follow this. So I was like, not the old school guys. They're going to do their own thing.
And speaking of expectations and things of that nature, I'll never forget. We started a campaign out with Cult of the Reptile God N2, I believe, and there is a NPC in there in the Golden Grain Inn who is a second or third level assassin whose name is Snigrot Dogroot. And it says in the module that if the characters come in there, he tries to poison one of them.
Mm-hmm.
The characters that we were running, they caught on to what something was going on, right? So one of the magic users went back to check it out and used a charm person spell on the guy that was back there, who happened to be the assassin. And basically, the description of the charm person says if the saving throw is failed, they consider you to be like a really good friend. And so I was telling the guy who was playing the character, I said, like me and you, Jim, like good friends like us. And he says, well, what if I was to ask you that I really needed you to go to the nearest large city and deliver a message for me? And it was like a matter of life and death that somebody needed to get this message. I mean, if I took care of your stuff here, would you do that for me? And I said, man, if it was really a matter of life and death, I would try to do that if I could. So he's like, well, that's what I'm going to ask this guy. I want him to leave his possessions here, and I want him to go to the city. So he cast a spell, and I said, okay, the guy agrees to do it. He sets off. So this guy, he didn't know he was an assassin, but he had poisons that was described in the module, and that was like his pride possession, was these poisons that he had. And so Jim's character took those. 2.5 years later, when his character, Arwick Finn, was 8th level, which was super hard to get a magic user up to 8th level, especially when I'm literally making people roll a 4-sided dice for hit points at first level.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm super strict with rules and stuff. And so it was an accomplishment. And when that Snigrot character NPC had made it there and the spell had worn off weeks later, as it's described, and he had blisters on his feet from walking so far and didn't know what he was doing and had lost his possessions, he vowed that come hell or high water, he was going to assassinate this person. Because after all, this was an assassin, right? So I had this marked in my notebook from 2.5 years ago. And I knew that I was going to do this at some point in the future. So I extrapolated. I took everybody's experience points and divided them by the number of characters and gave that amount of experience points to Snigrot Dogroot, which put him up around 10th level. I went to the assassination rules in the DMG, and it says basically you have this table, you cross index the level of the assassin with the level of the victim, you get a percentage, and then it tells you if the person does anything, like if he bolts his door or he puts a wizard lock on it or pushes an armoire and a trunk up against the door, you can modify this percentage roll. But if they don't, it's just a straight up roll. And of course, these people had been visiting the Silver Dragon Inn in Greyhawk for their whole time, right? They were well known. They were becoming heroes. You could have asked anybody on the street within 10 blocks where these guys hung out at, and they'd say, oh, we're at the Silver Dragon Inn, right? So it was no problem for this dude to find him. And I rolled the dice, and it says right in the DMG that if it's successful, the character is dead. There's nothing they can do about it, and you should inform the player when they arrive at the next game session. So here he shows up one day at like 8 a.m. when we're going to play all day, and it's bright and early, and he struggled just to get himself, there, but it's for the game. And he's really happy with his 8th level character he's played for 2.5 years, and he's really attached to it. And I'm like, you're dead.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, he didn't take it very well. He got upset. His wife got upset. They left. He didn't talk to me for a couple of weeks. when we had to go take a long walk out in the woods, and I thought he was going to kill me, but instead he just really wanted to talk to me about this, and he thought that I had it out for him personally. And I'm like, no, man, literally, I had this wrote down in my notes years ago, and this is how the rules work. I didn't put anything into it.
Mm.
I just did it this way. And he said, I really think that before you start a campaign, this is one of the things that you should tell people. You should let people know that they shouldn't mess with assassins because this might happen. And then my reply was, if you honestly knew an assassin in real life, a real life assassin, you wouldn't mess with him, probably, would you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, do I really have to tell that? But that's the thing, right? He was, I don't know. Some people might say I was a bad dungeon master for doing that because I arbitrarily, in a sense, for a story sense, not even a
Yeah.
mechanical sense, I off the character, but it made sense by the story. And it's
Right.
one of the things you got to be aware of. And that's the thing. That's another thing about old school Phil, right? Is that you're not just competing with dice rolls and interpretations. You're sometimes competing with the weird quirks of the game and the
Yeah.
way it works. And to understand that, at least in this first edition setting, you've got to be careful when you're messing with assassins, or they might show up and slit your throat in the
Right.
middle of the night.
Yeah. Your actions have consequences. And I'm going to relate that to something that Warlock wrote here, where he said long-term campaigns are overhyped, especially these days when competing with other activities. Loosely related one-shots and disposable characters is where it's at for me. And that's perfectly fine. What you don't get from that, in my opinion, is what Eric just described. All right. You don't get true world building. You don't get true character development. You don't get those consequences of past acts that come back to haunt you. You lose all of that. When you're playing very short campaigns and so I like to impress upon my players that no matter what you're doing now, the world is still moving on. The world is still doing its own thing too. So if you choose not to do something today, that doesn't mean that, 5 days from now, 5 sessions from now, you're going to, oh, well, let's go look at that now. That's not anywhere near where it was 5 weeks ago. That has advanced, and it's now something, it's a considerably bigger problem than it was, or it has picked up and left out of the area and now is no longer there for you to even investigate. But 10 months from now, that might come and visit you, and it might be the person you've been working with, your patron, that is a government official, be like, hey, remember I told you to do it, you never did this, and now we have this problem to deal with, and now you have to go fix a much larger problem. Or I ordered you to do this, you didn't do it, and now that person died and it's your fault, and now you're under arrest, kind of thing. It's like,
Without it being forced, without it being
right.
just like, it didn't happen, this happened to you. It's like, it didn't happen, and you kind of got away with it for a few years, but you
Yeah.
never ever went back and attended to it. So
Exactly.
it's another good example is for years in game and out game with the same character arc, then he got into a fight with a vampire that he reduced to non-corporeal form, mist, right? And it went away, and he never knew where it went, but
Right.
it kept an eye on him. And so for years, every so often, out of the blue, it would attack him at random, while because there was this kind of rivalry going on. And one night, he got into a conflict with it in an alley in Greyhawk, and he reduced it to corporeal or non-corporeal form again, and he shot it with a wand of frost.
Mm.
And it just started snowing down, and he collected it in this jar he happened to have on him by chance, and put a stopper on it and set it onto the doorsteps of a good temple and just knocked on the door and left.
Yeah.
So he put the vampire in the jar after he froze it with the wand of frost. It was quite hilarious, but it
Yeah.
was like the fourth or fifth time that this thing had come back to harry him and bewilder him, and he finally got the upper hand. But that's something too. You can make enemies that keep
Yeah.
showing experiences, and
Yeah.
until you finally say, look, okay, I'm going to put a stop to this. I got to find out where the dragon's lair is. He's already destroyed my father's castle. He's destroyed my castle. He's got it in for something the sins of the father has done. I wasn't even involved in this, but now I'm the one that's got to track this thing down in the bright desert and figure out, and motivation for adventure hooks that are personal.
Yeah. So let me do something really quick while we still have people here, and that is to I want to try to give away, because this is probably my last live stream of the month, and so I want to give away some memberships if I still have them remaining for this session. So let's see. We are live, and we are this one, and let me pause that. And yeah, so let me see if I have any left for this month. So here we go. Membership gift. Oh yeah, I don't have any left for this month. All right, so that was last month. All right, so next month, so starting in June, I will have some more free gifts to give out. So anyway, so when you're running, we'll go right back to our topic of dangerous journeys. So when you're running dangerous journeys at a convention that's just a straight up one shot, and you're running your own home games of dangerous journeys, or yeah. So how long is your current campaign? How long has that been going?
The current campaign has been the one we started in 92 or 93.
All right, so you're still going, but not the same characters though.
We had one full set of characters that got to the point where the players wanted to semi-retire them because they just wanted to try other vocations.
Yeah.
So we started some other characters and stuff and did some other things, but we've still been running it in the Kingdom of Rome, and it's based out of this little tiny thorpe called Ecclebury. And when I went to GaryCon, the first couple of times I ran the Mystery of Ecclebury, which is my own adventure that I devised. It's a witch hunt kind of a situation. And then it's connected to and leads into a changeling adventure that's called Zone 6. And that's where people take on the genetically and cybernetically enhanced soldiers to fight androids and robots in this secret lab called Zone 6. And then that leads into and is connected to an unhallowed adventure called Lovely Elysium, which is about a werewolf that's being chased by some ex-KGB agents who have been following it for years across the continents, and they run into the characters and that unfolds. So I did those 3 adventures so that I could highlight the 3 genre modules of Changeling, Unhallowed, and Mythos. And then I gave I did the second time I did the Mystery of Ecclebury was for the staff and volunteer game, which was hilarious because a lot of those guys like Luke were in the army and stuff, and they essentially, that game ended with them burning down Ecclebury.
Yeah.
So yeah, they got the bad guy, but I think they may have gotten a few other innocent bystanders. But as a one shot, those things don't seem to make as much difference, right? There's no fallout and no repercussions, so you can do crazy things in that way.
Okay. All right. So we're going to get ready to wrap this up and everything. So thank you so much, Eric, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And you're welcome to come back. I'd love to talk some more about dangerous journeys. Dig in again on it because, like I said, I think a lot of people are going to respond to this, and I know a lot of traffic went to the Facebook group, so that'll be good. So you're going to see a lot of new names there too. From this. And Squirrel, thanks a lot for that. Unfortunately, I didn't have any more free ones to give out, but thank you. I really appreciate that. And Squirrel, if you're in Ohio and you're not that far from Utica, New York, is basically it's a small town on the outskirts. 3 weeks from now, that's a Central New York RPG convention. First year it's being run. Some some special guests there. I mean, I'm a special guest there. Eric Tankar from Tankar's Tavern is a special guest there. Uh, um, Greg Gillespie, the writer of Barrel Maze and Dragon Slayer RPG, will be there as well. Joseph Block, who does Adventures Dark and Deep, will be there. He's running a game. I'm actually playing in one of his games. I am running Shadow Dark and Fallout at that convention. And then I'm playing in the rest, and I have like a 4-hour block. This is the first time, because when I first set up everything, I was like, holy cow, the first thing I'm going like 18 hours in a row, including my commute and everything. I was like, there's no way. So now I have a nice 4-hour block in between my first game. I'm going from like 10 to 2 is my Shadow Dark game. Then I have from 2 to 6 o'clock before I'm playing it, before I'm running my next game. So I'm like, all right, I finally have a nice 4-hour block where I can not only get settled into my hotel room, but I can then talk to people and just see what's going on and everything. So that's something I'm going to modify for all of my future all my future conventions, is always to play one in the morning, like run one in the morning, one run at night, and then leave the whole middle to just networking and talking and just watching, like experiencing the convention from that angle too. And then my next day will always be play one in the morning and then leave early, and get home. So, but yeah, if you guys can make it out there to that, definitely try to get out there. I'd love to meet you guys in person. I will be looking at Ohio conventions, so I know like Game Hole and Origins and everything are out there, and Ohio is not terribly long for me to get to, probably 10-hour drive. So that's like a 1-day kind of drive. I could do that in one shot, and check in the night before, and then 2 days at the convention, and still keep it kind of small in length. So anyway, so Eric, really a great
Likewise,
pleasure. We'll gladly have you on anytime that you want to talk about
thanks
or
for having
anything
me.
else. And yeah, I'm going to be reaching out to some of those other guys if they want to come on. And maybe I'll get a couple of you on. So people currently working on, on dangerous journeys, and see what, what's coming up and what we can see, beyond just the Facebook group and what you guys are doing there.
I think Lars and Dave Newton both have extensive websites dedicated to it too. Lars has one where you can generate a character.
Yeah. So I'll definitely look into that, and over the next couple of weeks, I will definitely be putting out some more videos, just breaking down, the core rules, because it's been a long time since I actually first introduced them. It's like when I first got them, and I was like, all right, let's start taking a look at it, and I haven't fully, dug deep into them. But now I'm super motivated to do so. So, all right, we're going to wrap this one up. Everyone, thanks for joining, and thanks for the the super chats and the gifted memberships and everything. All my members, whether you've been gifted one or you've signed on, you're welcome to come onto my Discord. I will also share your Discord out there, or your group's Discord out there. Do you have that Discord address with you now, or I could do it later?
No, I think it's just for like the committee that he's doing, that Dave Newton, for the rules and stuff. It's like,
I see. It's
so he's not like,
Discord.
he's not like doing it as a game. He does do another one that's as a game, but I would let him invite you to that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So
and I don't have a Discord.
If the Facebook group had a Discord, like a separate Discord, where
no, not that I know of.
They don't. All right.
I don't think so. Maybe
Okay.
maybe I should do that.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
If they have one, and see if we get more people involved with it. Yeah. So, all right. Thanks a lot, Eric. You have a great rest of your weekend. So if you're probably, celebrating a long weekend as well. So thank you for sharing this time with us as well.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone else, thanks for stopping in. And I am going to hit the stream. It's going to